Hi, I'm Jim Paolino, CEO of Lodestar Software Solutions and the host of Lodestar's Lending Leaders. On this podcast, we bring in thought leaders from across the real estate industry and occasionally outside of it to have conversations that are insightful, interesting, and impactful. Let's get started. Hi, everyone. Welcome to this week's Lodestar Lending Leaders. I have a very exciting guest, Josh Pitts, founder of Shred Media, which stands for Show Up, Hustle, Repeat Every Day. Hope I got that right. Absolute great follow in the industry, from his podcast to what he's doing on social media. Former loan officer who transitioned over to the media, the content side. This is going to be great, Josh, because we get to have a podcast about podcasts today. So we're gonna get meta in a hurry. So I hope you're ready for that.
Absolutely, let's go.
So to start, what got you into this industry? What got you to Shred, and what's kept you there?
I've been in the mortgage industry. Actually, before I even get into that, Jim, I want to thank you. Super excited to be here. Super proud of you. All that you're doing here. You're one of the leaders. You're one of the people that I've been talking about doing podcasts and things like this for so long, and you've taken it to heart. So first, kudos to you, to your team. Huge shout out to you guys. I got started with this. I've been in, like I said, I've been in the mortgage industry for a long time. A lot of people know my background. I'm still a licensed originator, but I don't originate anymore. I owned a mortgage company for years. I just have so much love and so much compassion and so much passion for the industry in particular. And I got into the media space. It's funny because I say media space a couple of years ago, and I founded Shred Media. And I just said, you know what, I want to continue to help people when it comes to doing things like this, when it comes to getting attention, and when it comes to getting creating impact in other people's lives. Because a lot of times when we think about what I talk about a lot, creating content, when it comes to putting out social posts, sometimes we can get overwhelmed. And especially with all the noise that happens in our world, really being that we're an attention impact network, I talk a lot about don't make noise, make an impact. That's why each and every one of us is here, is because we have the opportunity to impact people's lives through social media. And so when I got into it, it was just like, hey, you know what? Nobody's you had some great people, and people from mentors of mine, like Ryan Hills at RE Source TV. You have Frank and Brian Garay, like those guys, I watched them from afar. Rob Chrisman. And I'm just like, hey, you know what? I'm of the younger generation. No offense. Those guys have been they were the masters. Yeah. They were the ones I learned from, but I'm like, there's nobody else kind of on the younger side doing it. So I'm like, hey, let's just start out. Let's go. Let's talk to great people like yourself. Let's interview great originators who are in the trenches, making it happen. And Shred Media was born. And now, like I said, we're very fortunate to be the #1 attention impact network in all, mortgage and real estate, which is super fun. And we just continue to grow and get to have great conversations with incredible people like you, Jim.
Yeah. So when you see other people getting started with their content, especially over the last year, where, the preliminary way of content of getting in front of people in the industry was conferences got taken away from us. Yeah. How many people come to you of, hey, I want to do this, don't know where to start? How many people kind of get started, but then it fits in spurts? What is that process like for a lot of folks?
Honestly, Jim, it's one of those things for me that I wish there were so many more. We've had a lot. A lot of the people who our clients who we work with are usually larger entities. Yeah. I love helping the individual LO or loan officer, originator, realtor, when they come to us saying, hey, can you help me? Absolutely. All day long. A lot of people ask too, they're like, Josh, why don't you have a course? Why don't you have something out there? I want to try to give back to an industry that has helped me, that's literally provided such a great life and lifestyle for me and my family. So when it's individuals, I'm like, hey, call me. Let's do a 15, 20 minute. I'd love to walk you through it. But when it comes to working with big entities and companies, it's to this day, I wish there were more. I wish that, like I said, when I gave you kudos and a shout out, it's cool to see what you're doing, because you in time as well are you're inspiring people. You're inspiring. You and I are kind of the ones leading the way and kind of paving the trail for other companies, for other entities to start doing this. But honestly, to your question here, Jim, I thought for sure during the pandemic, I thought when people were at home, I thought we would see this plethora. I thought we'd see this uptick in content and people putting out social posts. In fact, it was the opposite. We actually saw a decline, which I was now it couldn't be a better time than ever to start putting out content, to start doing things like this. And people, again, it was a banner year. Interest rates were low. Companies were busy, but that's when they should have been in front of people, really been reaching out, been doing a podcast, been doing a show, been at least doing something to really connect with their audience. And we didn't see it. So, I mean, to answer your question, we saw a downturn. And again, some of the things that we do on our data and analytics side of Shred Media, we actually scour, we spend a lot of time on social media, and we actually have numbers backing up. Like we saw a decline in actual engagement when it not let me take that back. Not engagement of posts, but of people actually posting content of companies, individuals. And I'm just like, I wonder if it's just too busy, or do they all have like Zoom fatigue? Do they all have fatigue of just being out there? But that wasn't the case, because we actually saw numbers, especially people in our industry, they were on social media more than ever. So they just weren't posting. So interesting trend for sure.
Yeah. And when you see those large companies come in and want to get started with content, and you said you wish more would, what do you think's keeping them back from doing that?
Oh, I'm going to get real right here, man. I'm probably going to offend some people, but I will try. I'll do my best not to. What holds them back?
Yeah.
The wrong mindset, Jim. Like that's what it is we work with marketing departments, and here's the problem. And again, I hope some CMOs and I hope marketing teams hear this, because when one of the first things as a marketing department, if you ask, hey Josh, or hey Shred, hey Jim, what's the ROI of social media?
Yeah.
You missed it. Like, everybody's about ROI. That's our industry though, Jim. It's like ROI. We have to be ROI positive. We have to be ROI centric.
Right.
There's so much opportunity to impact people's life. You can't think of social media as just like an ROI. Like you missed it. You have to be putting out, you have to be doing things like this that are actually going to impact the industry. How are you as a company, as an entity, changing people, impacting the lives of the people in the industry? If you look at social media in that way, you could care less what the ROI is, to be honest, because you know that if you're even changing or impacting just a few lives, those people are going to be loyal to you forever and ever and ever and ever. And that ROI is absolutely that's limitless. So that's probably, that's a really good, I love that, Jim, because that's the biggest mistake I see companies making in particular. That's the thing that's holding them back too. Plus, a lot of them, and I'll say this too, a lot of your mid-level management and executives, they're scared. They do have a fear. And a lot of people can't do this, which again, that's why with our platform, we love kind of giving them like, hey, let us help you. Let's help you start. Let us help you kind of get things underway, and then you can take it and roll with it. So,
well, how many people do you have? And I went through this, if they don't want to necessarily put themselves out there, right? You know, they're reluctant to do that. They're reluctant to get in front of camera. They're reluctant to do these things.
For sure.
For me, I was like that. I've been asked by some of my marketing folks to do this podcast for years. And it was finally around COVID that I did, mainly because I desperately missed talking to people in the industry. But I also came to the realization that if me putting my face and myself out there helps the brand, that helps everyone at the company. So let me just do that. I know from looking at your content, you're a big consumer of Gary Vee and Gary Vee related content. And I know a big thing that he said when I basically don't want to energize and not drink coffee, I listen to Gary Vee for about 5 minutes.
Nice.
I really recommend that. But and he always says, do what you're comfortable with, right? Whether it be camera, whether it be, for me, it's conversations, whether it be writing, whether it be visual content. So how much do you see people trying to do that where, find their core competency and go from there?
I still don't see enough. And that's, again, why we love work when companies reach out to us and say, hey, can you help us at least get started? A lot of people, they just need that little extra push. And again, maybe they're not as brave as you, which again, like I mentioned, Jim, you're one of the people who said, you know what, this isn't a comfortable thing for me, but I'm going to push through and do it anyway. And again, like you said, look at the lives that you're impacting. Look the other people that you're inspiring. If more leaders saw that opportunity right now, our industry, we would absolutely, we would be in such a different place. And it would be, again, things are exciting, but if we saw leaders in particular of companies saying, just like you did, Jim, hey, if I can inspire if I can, rally the troops around what I'm doing, man, it would be an exciting time. But again, that's why I love when companies reach out to us and say, hey, we just need that help. Just help us get started. And then, but what's sad too, sometimes we get these clients and we'll work with them, 6, 8, 12 months. And then they're like, we've got him in this great place. I'm like, hey, the ball's rolling. Now you guys just got to keep going with it. And then as soon as they 1 month, they don't do it. And I'm like, no, you had all this great momentum, you had everything. And then you got to keep, when it comes to what you and I are doing, literally it's cliche. It sounds super simple, but consistency and continuing to do it month after month, even if you're doing just one show a month or one a week, whatever it is, you just have to keep doing it. If you build up all this momentum and then all of a sudden you miss one, your audience was like, well, I guess they're done. And then you lost them. So
someone was telling me, I think half of the podcasts that started don't make it to 7 episodes.
Yep.
or
I
something
think
like that.
I think it's 75% is what it
Oh,
is.
wow.
It's a huge number that,
Mm-hmm.
and which again is, it's cool to see people starting, but
Yeah.
I've asked a lot of people, cause we've had, again, companies reach out like, oh, we tried it, didn't work. And I
Yeah.
said, well, why didn't it work? And it was like, well, we just didn't have the time. Well, okay. Well, like,
Yeah.
time is something you can probably, again, you can bring somebody in, you can work with a company like Shredder, you can find the time.
Mm-hmm.
But it's interesting when we hear the companies who are just like, well, we didn't have anything to talk about. And I'm like,
Yeah.
what?
Yeah.
Like, if you don't have enough to talk about, like, you are absolutely, there's so much in this industry to talk about. So if that's what's holding you back, like that should not be and like you said, if it's the fear, if you're a leader in your industry and that's what's holding you back, you need to change that mind. Like you have to change.
Well, how many people, you post that first podcast, right? 10 views, 12 views, something like that. How do you work through that, especially in the beginning? Because I think that's where a lot of folks start. And I'm sure you went through some version of that with Shred a couple of years ago when you were starting out.
Yeah, dude, this is, I'm so glad you asked this question, because
Yeah.
this is truly an ego thing. This is most of the executive. And again, I actually had I won't say names. I had a really cool conversation with an executive that, I mean, I would say almost everybody knows who this executive is.
Yeah.
But when he reached out to me, he just said, hey, Josh, like my biggest fear is that I only get 2 views on one of my videos. And he's like, this is a true fear. And again, this is an executive of a multi-billion-dollar company. I'm like, I was like, dude, like, really? Like all the things that you've accomplished, you're worried about 2 views? Like, he's like, yeah, I fear that nobody will watch it. I'm like, you got to get over that. Like, that is just, here's the facts of social media is that's going to happen. Like, but you've got to be willing to step up as the leader who you truly are. If you are a leader, then you have to be able to accept that reject, which is not, again, social media. We all start at 0. You have to work your way up from 0 and just continue to climb. And I told him, I'm like, dude, you have to start. Like 2 views is awesome. What if one of those 2 views, one of those people saw that video and you changed their life? Like forget about the views in the very beginning. And that's when companies say, well, how many views are we going to get? Does it matter? Like, how many views are you getting now? What if you only get 10 views, but 8 of the 10 people who saw it decided that, wow, like this company really means something. What they're talking, this message that they're portraying, this story that they're telling resonates with them. Views don't matter anymore, ladies and gentlemen. If you think that views matter, you're missing it. So that's
and the thing that I kind of told myself, and only about half the people I talk to actually agree with this, is I feel like the fact I'm doing a podcast is more important than how many people listen to it.
100%.
So the fact that you put that content out there, because it's more about, I've had employees, someone who produces this podcast, Elena, who's been fantastic. She came on as an employee, seeing our blog, seeing our newsletter, because she goes, this is the type of company that cares about this stuff.
Yeah.
So it's not just about getting clients, right? It's about that thought leadership. It's about, helping recruit people. There's just so much momentum that comes with it, but it takes a while. And how do you measure that impact early on in the first 5 episodes with someone starting out? Or you just say, hey, do it for a year and then we talk? Like
it's just that. It's like human capital is the number one most underrated thing in our industry. Like, and I truly like, and human impact, like what are you doing as an organization to impact the lives of those around you?
Yeah.
Like there is no measurable impact. Like you can't go back and say like our first episodes, we impacted X amount of lives. You do it because you truly care. And you know that there will come a time where it's just like you said, I get your newsletter. I follow you guys because again, what I see is like, it's different. It's impactful. Lodestar, what you guys are doing. I'm like, man, they care about us as an industry. They care about the people. That's what creating content is all about. That's what doing a podcast. That's what doing, a blog or a vlog, whatever it may be. That's what it's out. And again, you can't go back and say, well, we're going to try 10 episodes and if we're going to go back and we're going to analyze it. And after those 10 episodes, if we don't have the impact or the ROI that we were expecting, we're going to stop. You and I, you started during the pandemic. I've at this point done hundreds and hundreds of shows. Have some of those shows hit like really, really hard? Absolutely. Have some of those missed? I still have podcasts to this day that maybe only get, 30 or 40 downloads. And I'm like, cool. But again, what if of those 30 downloads, what if only 2 people listen to that download and they're just like, wow, that inspired me? What if they became the next Jim? Like, what if they are the ones who went and started their next podcast and they started on their journey of impacting other people's lives? That's just it. We don't think through that. We just think as an industry, as a mortgage, as a real estate industry, we just think it's always about numbers. And if it's like, again, if it's not increasing the bottom line, we have to, you and I, but that's our journey that you and I are on. We're changing that mindset. We're changing like, hey, forget about the numbers, forget about the 30 views, forget about the 10,000 views that you're going for, and think about the lives that you're impacting. If you look at it in that way, it changes the entire perspective and you're going to go on this journey with us.
So for you getting started, was there a moment where, you had mentioned only having a few views to start? Was there a moment where you feel like the switch was flipped or like a turning point or something like that? Or was it just an overtime slow progression? Like what things pop out as turning points?
No, there was definitely a couple of turning points, but it was a gradual thing. Like there was definitely something, and people also, they're like, well, of course you're so different. Like that's why people listen to you. You're the guy who wears a t-shirt, a hat, and has like a cool, but like, that's what made you, like, that's what gave you, or that's what made you. And I'm like, that's what made me. Like, no, I was just me. Like, that's just it. Like the biggest turning point for me, honestly, Jim, is when I said, and some of you guys know this story, when I finally threw everything to win and I went to an Inman Connect event in New York. About, like, if you've ever been to Inman Connect New York, it's like a black tie affair. Everybody's in their, 3-piece suits. And I showed up in a t-shirt and a hat. Like, and again, the video went viral. This guy came up to me. We were shooting content. This guy came up to me and said, who the hell do you think you are? You disrespectful. Like, and I'm like, whoa. I'm like, dude, I'm just me. You can be you. That's cool. Like, I'm glad that you are. The turning point for me and everything was when I realized I could just be me. And I started just talking as me. That's when I really started to see our views, our engagement start to tick up. That's when we kind of started to see things go in that direction. Is when I realized that I could be Josh Pitts. I didn't have to appeal to a certain audience. I didn't have to appeal to originators or executives. I was just going to talk about the things that I love talking about. I enjoy talking about. That's when my content, I just saw an uptick. And again, I've done a review of some of my very first videos, and you could see I was super uncomfortable. I was trying to do interviews to, appease certain people. But when I just said, you know what? I'm going to do the content that I really want. That was the biggest turning point for me. And like I said, was it all of a sudden that I went from, 50 views to 10,000 views? No. Like it went from 50 views to 100 views to 200 views. And then it went up from there. And again, to me, that was like awesome. I remember the day, like, honestly, Jim, I remember when one of my first videos got 100 views. I was like, I made it. Ladies and gentlemen, I got it. 100 views. Don't worry about it. And again, that was just a starting point.
Then the next one, 20, right? Or something like that.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I definitely see that. And I think it's so important, the point of doing being yourself and having conversations that are genuine, because it's gonna feel fun. You're going to like doing it. Like people ask about, even my business partner, about, hey, how successful is the spin? How many views? What is happening? I'm like, I just look forward to recording these every week. And I think for right now, that's enough. Like that's because you're going to keep on doing it. And if it feels like it's a chore every time you do it, you're going to burn out.
See, and that's the hardest part though, Jim, because so many partners, executives, I think there's a lot of people who are scared because they have other people on their board, or they say, well, you're doing this podcast. Like, is it really is it a good use of your time? Yes, it is. Right. Because again, this is building what we talk. We always say this is a relationship industry. This is how we build relationships, especially now, like you mentioned, because we're not going to conferences. This is how people are consuming content. Like, this is how people are listening. Like, and that's just it too, is when I hear somebody say, well, you only got a couple hundred views on that one. Like, did that one flop? No, of course, no, that didn't to me, because again, a couple hundred people viewed it. That's great. And I don't know who it actually impacted. So I love that you bring that up, because I think sometimes that's the other, going back to that question you asked earlier, is what holds people back. Sometimes it's their team. Sometimes it's the people around them, like just putting into their head, like, oh, well, is that really ROI positive of your time as a CEO or as a CMO or whoever it is? Like, of course it is. Like, it really is. And you just have to be the one to push through that barrier for your team and show them, like, lead from the front.
Yeah. Well, there's a well-known phrase in marketing that half of your marketing dollars are useless, but you don't know which half. How do you think of
Exactly.
that?
No,
Is that true? How do you approach that at Shred?
I would say 80% is useless. Like literally, like it's like 80,
Yeah.
it's the 80-20 rule, man. It's
Yeah.
the 80% is absolutely
Mhm.
useless, and the 20% is what's really hitting home. But that's it. And it goes back to the old style of thinking too, Jim, is like 80, like
Mhm.
big marketing companies, 80% of the spend used to be to actually get the ad, like the Super Bowl commercial or what,
Right.
like they would be spending so much money to get, on the front page in the newspaper or on the right television. And then, the other 20% was actually to create the content, to actually, create that commercial. When in my mind, it should be the opposite. Like,
Mhm.
especially when it comes to Facebook or LinkedIn or whatever, 80% of your budget, 80% should be allocated to the content creation, doing
Mhm.
something like this, working with somebody who can actually make it happen. And then 20% should be really allocated to the, hey, I'm going to go do an ad on LinkedIn. I'm going to go do an ad on Instagram. I'm going to go, put it wherever and wherever you want. The traditional in our industry right now,
Yeah.
it should be flip flopped.
And I think the thing you do really well that I'm slowly working on is once you have that podcast, let's take clips of it, right? Let's
Yeah.
let's slice and dice all of this content and put it across so many other mediums and so many other social media outlets are just in different places. And that's,
Yeah.
once you have that content, there's a lot of things that you can do to kind of reuse that and leverage that. Because
100%.
ultimately the time commitment, especially if you have a good producer, someone who knows someone like I'm very fortunate to do, it's not that much. It's you're having a conversation, and how many calls as an executive do you just have with people to explore business or talk about something or catch up or anything like that? So
Yeah,
I think
exactly. And Jim, I couldn't agree more with you. Like creating this, and I stole this from Gary Vaynerchuk, creating pillar content. So this, you and I, what we're doing right now is pillar content. We're having a great discussion, but I already can it's funny because you probably see me, like I'm making little notes in here, like, during this conversation, this was a great talking point with Jim. Going and now creating micro content to share, like we are seeing more and more micro content hitting really, really well with an audience than anything. Again, you'll probably have some really good listeners on this podcast or views on this podcast, but most of them will probably they'll jump around. And so creating that micro content from pillar content, I think that's, and Jim, I know you have a team, but if they can't, send this to me and my team. I'm going to create some good clips for you and I, because you and I, this is cool. Like there's been some points during this that I'm like, yeah, a 2-minute segment of this, people will listen for 2 minutes. Sometimes they don't have 30 minutes to listen to an entire podcast.
No, absolutely. And when I was on Shred a few months ago, at this point, that was a turning point for me of, hey, I can do this podcast. This is fun. I could do one of these every week. So I definitely gotta thank you for that. So hopefully this can get micro clipped as well. So.
Absolutely. But that's just the thing is you never know. And then you get one more person doing it. And I'm sure you, Jim, you've inspired somebody. I'm sure somebody's like, well, Jim can do it. I'm going to go do it in my life as well. I'm going to go out and do that. And then that's what we continue to see spread. And here's one thing. I actually had a conversation with an executive the other day. They're like, well, Josh, what if there's 10,000 podcasts just in the mortgage space? Number one, that's never going to happen. Never. But let's just say it did. How amazing would that be for our industry? Like there's 10,000 mortgage podcasts. That means the consumer, that means they're everybody's aware of our industry. And it's not just some of your, going back to the ad dollars. It's not just, and I don't, it's not just the Quickens and the Rockets and those people who are just throwing money at it, who are in front of that audience. It's all of us. It's individuals. And it's those 10,000 people, there's a couple 100,000 originators in this industry. Even if there's 10,000 of them, awesome. That means they're doing a phenomenal job and they're educating the clients, educating the consumer. That's my take on it.
I think what I've seen so far too is one of the other podcasts I went on early on was Licking on Lending. And generally people who have podcasts want more podcasts in the industry. Right? They want, you've been so supportive. David was so supportive. So I feel that way. If someone is, starting a podcast, I don't think you're taking views from me. I don't care. No. And I think this is a concept that next time we talk, I want to explore more, is the idea of co-opetition. Right, which is so much in the industry. So we're going to save that for the next time we talk.
I say that we got to come back to that one of these times, because I love that conversation. And honestly, huge shout out to David Licken, man. He's one of those pioneers. He's one of the guys that inspired me too. I'm right there with you.
And he has a style that works for him really well. And I think it's important to do that. And my one thing too with our past conversation is like there are ways to make it easy on yourself too.
Yeah.
And I don't think I'm giving away the secret sauce here, but I have one of a segment on this podcast. It's called America's Next Top Home Buyer. So we just go in and we talk to a home buyer about their home buying experience, about what they did, learn about the process. Because for people who are vendors like myself, it's so easy to lose that perspective.
So easy.
The other reason I did it is I can just ask my friends to come on my podcast anytime someone buys a house. So it's super easy to get guests. Anytime someone says, hey, I just closed on a house. Okay, we're talking this week. It's great. My wife was my first guest. So it's also like you can make it easier on yourself, but also do things that work. So
man,
that's
everybody
giving away the secret sauce here, but
I was gonna say, everybody who just heard that, if you like have been wondering and like struggling, well, again, I can't create content. I don't know. Take Jim's idea right there. And imagine the value. Again, I talked about this on a show yesterday, real quick, Jim, I talked about this on a show yesterday. Everybody's making this transition from refinance to purchase right now. Yeah. If you really want to shine with a real estate group or a brokerage, do a podcast with them. Say, hey, let's bring on your recent home buyer and let's talk through the experience. Like that is value for your real estate agent. That's value for your client. Like that. And that's amazing content. Talk about the good, the bad, and the ugly. Like some of the things that I'm seeing going viral right now are those type of conversations. So Jim, you gave away the secret sauce, brother.
I think it's going to be okay. I mean, another great thing and reason I do that is because one of the things I like about the industry is everyone has something to say about it because everyone needs a place to live. So there's just always a perspective, which makes it easy to talk about. So you get the content together, you have your views, you have everything going on. The next step, where do you put it? How many people come to you and say, hey, Josh, there's this TikTok thing, and I really think I should be the first mortgage company on it. Like, how do you have people approach then the avenues that they're putting that content out?
Yeah, I tell them wherever they're comfortable. Like I literally we have a lot of people asking us about Clubhouse, TikTok. Hi Ho just came out. Like most people haven't even heard of Hi Ho. I have, but see, I'm an early adopter. Like that's something we do. We look at these platforms and we say, okay, first and foremost, if you're a big entity, like where are you spending the most time as an organization? If you're familiar with LinkedIn, which most companies are, like, hey, let's stay on LinkedIn. Let's create content on LinkedIn. So I tell companies that until you're able to absolutely like master LinkedIn, we're not even thinking about TikTok. Like, because again, you're already overwhelmed with just trying to post on LinkedIn. Why would you try to go to a completely different platform? They're like, well, there's opportunity there. There's opportunity on LinkedIn. And in my opinion, LinkedIn still has some of the most organic reach of all social platforms, period, bar none. Like TikTok is great as well. But that's the problem with our industry, Jim, is we chase the shiny object. We're always at the SOS syndrome. I call it SOS syndrome. We're always going after the next shiny object syndrome. Like we're always going, TikTok, Clubhouse, going here, going there. And then when companies reach out to me, they're like, hey, we want to start a TikTok campaign. I'm like, okay, so how's your Facebook campaign going? They're like, oh, not very well. Okay, how's your LinkedIn campaign going? Oh, not very well. And I'm like, then why in the hell are you going to try and go on TikTok? Like that's a whole thing. Like, do you have somebody lined up who can like create TikTok videos? Well, no, we just know that that's where everybody's attention is. You're wrong. You're dead
also
wrong.
Whose attention is on TikTok too? Like, are you trying to get 14 to 18-year-olds to buy a house? Probably not. Right. No. So like you have to, I think of the audience on those platforms as well.
Brilliant. And so a perfect example of this is the mortgage guy. If you don't follow the mortgage guy on TikTok, he does a fantastic job. I had him on the show, but that's just it. The problem with companies sometimes is they see this new shiny object. And they're like, oh, well, originators are there. His audience is the home buyer, the young home buyer, like you mentioned, Jim, and he's doing a great job with it. Most originators are not getting on there to watch, a company like, oh, well, yeah, of course. Now I'm going to go send my business to ABC more or to ABC, blah, 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 blah. That's not it. They're going on LinkedIn for that stuff. They're going on Facebook still for that stuff. Plus, and I'll tell you want me to share a secret? That's where the majority of our industry is hanging out right now. They're hanging out on LinkedIn, on Facebook, YouTube, and Insta. Those are the four. You shouldn't even, if you're a company trying to target our industry, TikTok is not it. Like it, and I personally, Jim, I don't think it will ever be it. Like straight up.
You left out Twitter. Is that something that people?
Twitter's dead, man. Twitter is so dead. Like people, you can argue. You send me a message. We can argue this all day. Twitter's Trump, and whether you love him or hate him, like that organization made Twitter. And in our industry in particular, I honestly think I don't know if you use it, but the most people I talk about, you have some of these companies using like, oh, Twitter. Like Twitter is like, like Twitter's gone. Twitter's absolutely move on. Like go to YouTube, go to Facebook, go to LinkedIn, focus on that, and you'll get way more reach, way more ROI, if you will.
No, for me, it's LinkedIn. I don't even check Facebook anymore.
Yeah.
Instagram I like, but it's more of entertaining content.
Yep.
But you can still do the Broke Agent. I don't know if you know of them or follow them. Like,
Absolutely.
hilarious, and
Yep.
it's just really funny real estate memes. Most that have to do with drinking, but
Yeah.
it's just a really entertaining thing. And also, that would not work on LinkedIn, right? But it
No.
works really well on Instagram. So I think it's important to keep that in mind.
See, and we know that
So,
organization. We talk to them quite
yeah,
frequently, and they're one of those. They know
yeah,
they've nailed it. They've mastered Instagram. They do
right,
really, really well on it. And they haven't. They tried doing LinkedIn. I don't know if you've ever heard the story, but they actually tried doing LinkedIn, and it failed like
yeah,
horribly. It did not do well on LinkedIn. So they know what they're really, really good
yeah,
at. If organizations take that as a perfect example, like find what you're really good at, find that voice. Is it entertaining? Is it educational? Like what
yeah.
is your target audience, and then run on that platform.
Yeah. And that's what we're starting to think of what things would work on Instagram that are different than the more formal,
Yeah,
LinkedIn type content. So,
for sure.
wrapping up here, you've been super generous with your time. If you could have one podcast guest, past, present, future, whoever it is, who would it be?
Man, when you asked me this, I've been
Mhm.
thinking about it, and there's literally so many people,
Yeah.
and I'm like, oh my gosh, like it'd be fun to have like Elon Musk or like
Mhm.
like this person or that person.
Yeah.
Honestly, if there was one person, probably more than anything, and I know this is kind of maybe sound cliche or sound
Mhm.
like I honestly think it would be cool to have George Washington. Like I know it's
Mhm.
like, oh, first president. Like and
Yeah.
maybe it's just because I'm watching a series on Netflix right now, and I don't watch
Okay.
a ton. Like I don't have a ton of, but like
Yeah.
him as a general, and him as like a founding father of the country.
Yeah.
And again, some people may argue this point, but just understanding his mindset of everything that was against him, like holy cow,
Yeah.
like you literally had an entire like just literally trying to physically destroy you. What type of mental fortitude did it take to continue to push through that? Like, and again, and there's a lot of controversy about what type of man he actually was, but again, to be, I mean, the first president, a founding father of our
Yeah.
country, there's a lot of things like I could ask him so many questions, but my main question for him would be like, how did you have the mental fortitude to push through it? Like
Oh,
that.
I'm a president nerd, so that's awesome. Even I think the things that you don't realize is that when he was president, he had to recreate everything from scratch. I was reading
Exactly.
a book about presidents because, like I said, like was obsessed as a kid. I memorized all the presidents when I was little. There was a thing when they started to have state dinners at I guess the version of the White House then. He had notes for everyone. Because he thought that when there were bottles of wine at the table, they were cluttering the table and not looking formal and professional enough. So he invented basically like a wine cooler on wheels. Like he was like
What?
sending notes of like, no, what we need is like basically like a cooler on wheels that we can put in the side. So that way all the wine's there and it's not as messy for the like French ambassador who's coming in or something like that. And like, this is like, that's the type of stuff he's thinking about on top of all of the big things of that. So like, it's just funny to see like the things you would never really think of. So
Well, and that's just it. Is how many things like little things like that. See, I'd never heard that. I've heard other
yeah.
stories too, like some of the things that he kind of brainstormed. And again, found like starting off, there's so
Mhm.
many things they had to reinvent. And to me, that's who I'd love to have on a podcast.
Yeah.
That would be so cool just to sit down with him. The other
Yeah.
one for me, and I've had a chance to talk to him, but I'd love to have on the show is Joe Rogan.
Yeah.
Joe Rogan, he's one of those guys. He's one of the reasons I started my podcast. So
Mhm.
I would love to actually have him on the show. He's super controversial, but
Yeah.
he's also a really deep thinker. There's some things, again, if you've ever listened to his podcast, plus, I mean, the fact that he just showed, and this for all you listening, if you've considered whatever is holding you back from starting a podcast or
Yeah.
whatever, Joe Rogan just sold his podcast for $100 million. Like, he is the pioneer of what is
Right.
possible with podcasting.
Yeah.
And if that
And
isn't go ahead.
sorry, love him or hate him, you know who he is for the most part,
Yes.
right? I'm nodding my head of like, absolutely. Like, not only was he the guy who like wasn't that good of a man show host, but now he's been a great podcast host, right? So,
It's so
yeah,
true. So
yeah,
true.
yeah. Well, great. Thanks so much for your time. Last thing, what's on coming up for Rise and Tread? What do people have to look forward to over the
Yeah.
next year and beyond?
Over the next year with Shred, we're continuing to, like I said, really helping, like I started out, being an attention impact network, we really want, this discussion is a perfect example.
Yeah.
We want to help companies. We want to help individuals. We want to help them push through those barriers that's holding them back. And again, not just make noise, but start making an impact.
Yeah.
That's what creating content, that's what doing a podcast is all about. And like I said, big things to come. We continue to grow some of the events that we're looking forward to this fall, where we actually can start traveling again, going to different events. But the biggest thing is like, just continue to watch. A lot of people have kind of put us as the underdog when they compare us to traditional media or PR and marketing, but that's just it. Jim, you know me, I'm all about being the underdog. And when somebody puts me in the cage, like, I'm like, let's go. Like, so
hey, I have a picture of Rocky behind me. I'm absolutely in the same boat. Yeah.
I love that. When I first saw that picture, I'm like, yeah, dude, me and you we're those fighters. Yeah. Put me in the corner, man. We're coming out swinging.
Yeah, I feel more comfortable when someone's saying, "Oh, this isn't going to work. You're crazy." I'm like, "Oh, good. People are rooting against me. That's exactly. Like just like good. Like I'm doing something right."
As you say, the more haters you have, the more successful you will be. Like, I mean, again, bring him up. I love him or hate him. Trump had more haters than anybody and became president of the United States. Let's just say that. Like, so, but if I've got haters, bring it on. Like, I love when people doubt, and not from like an egotistical point of like, hey, I want to just prove them wrong. It's just like, I must be doing something right because, yeah.
Yeah, no such thing as bad press. Not sure if that's completely true.
I don't know either. People keep saying that, but I'll take it.
Yeah. Well, hey, thanks so much for coming on, Jeff. Looking forward to continuing the conversation.
My pleasure, man. You're awesome.
Good one. Thanks.
Later.
Cool. Thanks for listening to this week's episode. Please like and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. We'd also love to hear from you in our comments or at lendingleaders@lfsoftwaresolutions.com. A very special thanks to Elena Gardner and Brian Rieger, who help produce our episodes each week. See you next time.